Why are you here?" The words I finally forced out were so faint and trembling that they startled even me. It was the day I returned from volunteering in Central and South America, providing medical aid. The moment I opened the door to what should have been my empty home, what washed over me wasn't relief. It was the shock of seeing people who had no reason to be there. On the sofa in my living room, my sanctuary, sat two figures lounging as if they owned the place. They were my parents. But when they turned toward me at the sound of my voice, there wasn't the slightest trace of guilt or surprise on their faces. Instead, they wore expressions as natural as if they were simply welcoming a daughter who had arrived a little later than expected. "Oh, Lauren, welcome back. You came home earlier than I thought," my mother said with a warm smile, closing the magazine in her lap. My father added, "Long trip, huh? You must be tired," as though he were kindly sympathizing with me. Their unnervingly casual reaction only deepened my confusion. This was supposed to be my house, my fortress, where I was returning for the first time in 2 months. Clutching the handle of my suitcase, I stepped into the living room. "Answer me. Why are you here? How did you even get in?" I tried to keep my tone calm, but my voice grew sharper. At that, my mother's expression turned faintly indignant, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Not a hint of shame. "Oh, don't look so frightening. When you signed the lease for this apartment, you wrote down our number as your emergency contact, didn't you? That was in case something ever happened to me, not so you could come and go as you please." My rebuttal only made her sigh dramatically. "Exactly. We were worried about that very something ever happening. You went several days without contacting us while you were overseas. Remember? We were so worried we couldn't stand it. So we pretended we'd lost your key and called a locksmith." "What did you just say?" I couldn't believe my ears. I called, crying, "I lost my keys, please help me." And the nice locksmith came right away. Of course I paid the fee, so don't worry. Her blithe tone left me speechless. She had abused my personal information, feigned distress, and tricked a locksmith into illegally opening the door to my fortress. And now she spoke of it as though it were cleverness or kindness. A cold dread seeped through me. It was true that for a few days I had been in a remote village with no reception, but I had told them in advance. Even so, why do you have a key? To my perfectly reasonable question, my mother pulled a spare key from her handbag and showed it off as though it were a trophy. When we looked around, we found a spare you had left in the entryway cabinet. I borrowed it and made a copy. Isn't it a parent's duty to look after a child's home while she's away? We even cleaned sometimes so dust wouldn't pile up. A spare key? Without asking me? I was stunned. They had exploited my emergency contact information, lied to the management company with crocodile tears, stolen my spare key, and even made duplicates. And all of it, my mother excused with the phrase, "a parent's duty." The people before me were my parents, yet they felt like incomprehensible, terrifying strangers. The chill running down my spine was sharper than disbelief. Don't make it sound so awful, calling it without asking. We're family, aren't we? What's wrong with family entering a family member's home? Surely you weren't planning to lock us out like strangers. That cursed phrase, "no boundaries in family," Something I'd heard all my life, stabbed into my mind. Yes, they had always been this way. My room, my diary, every private space of mine. To them, boundaries simply didn't exist. And the very reason I'd bought this home was to escape that suffocation. But now, anger surged as my eyes caught the other violations around the house. Ugly landscape paintings hung on the walls. The balcony was cluttered with gaudy plants I had never chosen. And worst of all, on the dining table stood an empty wine bottle. It was the vintage bottle I had set aside to open someday on a special occasion. A symbol of my achievement, a celebration of purchasing this home. That wine. Following my gaze, my father said without a trace of remorse, "Oh, that? A fine wine. Since you were coming home, we opened it to celebrate. But honestly, keeping something that expensive just to drink alone would be far too indulgent." Something inside me snapped. That bottle was proof of everything I had worked for. This home I had clawed together after 10 years of relentless effort. It was the one special bottle I had saved, meant to be opened while relaxing in this very room. And yet they had consumed it without asking, as if it had always belonged to them. I quietly set my suitcase down on the floor and pointed to the front door. "Leave." "What did you say?" My mother frowned. "Both of you, leave this house right now. This is my home. I bought it with my money, with my work. It is my property. You don't get to make spare keys without my permission. Walk in whenever you like, rearrange my furniture, or drink and eat what belongs to me." My voice no longer trembled. "Lauren, how dare you speak like that?" My father rose from the sofa. "Is that any way to talk to your parents? Everything we did was for your sake." "For my sake?" I cut him off. "If it were for my sake, you would respect my wishes. If it were for my sake, you would protect my privacy. But this wasn't for me. This was for you. Because you still want my life under your control, don't you?" For the first time in their lives, my parents looked at me as though I had committed an act of rebellion. For just an instant, the look on their faces stung my heart. But I couldn't back down now. If I didn't draw the line here, I would never escape this suffocation. "Put the keys down. And get out. Now." Perhaps 10 minutes of silent glaring passed. My mother eventually broke into tears, while my father clicked his tongue in frustration. At last, my mother slammed the duplicate keys onto the table, and the two of them left, casting me resentful looks as they went. The heavy thud of the door closing echoed through the apartment like a sentence being pronounced. I forced myself not to collapse on the spot, scanning the silent living room. The tasteless landscape paintings and the empty bottle of expensive wine. Was this really my fortress? Shaking with rage and sorrow, I recalled the path that had brought me here. I work as a nurse in an emergency room where every second counts. Every day is filled with alarms, tense air, and life or death decisions. In the midst of that relentless pressure, I had clung to one dream: to have a sanctuary of my own, untouched by anyone else. Since becoming a nurse at 22, I had worked without pause. While friends enjoyed trips and shopping, I picked up double shifts and spent my weekends working at a clinic. I gave up fashion and dining out, pouring nearly all my income into savings. Friends called me too extreme, but I didn't mind. I had one clear goal: to own a home of my own. After 10 long years, that dream finally became real. A brand new apartment overlooking the city center. I still remember the faint trembling in my fingers as I signed the contract. This home was the very crystallization of my effort. What I loved most was the sunny balcony extending from the living room. Those quiet moments, sipping coffee while watching the bustle of the city from afar, were treasures beyond compare. And right after buying the apartment, I fulfilled another long-held dream. Volunteering as a nurse in a small village in Latin America. There, in a place without infrastructure, seeing the smiles of local children reminded me why I had become a nurse in the first place. And after 2 months today, I returned home with a heart full of fulfillment, only to find everything trampled underfoot by them. This is my home. I clenched my fists, repeating it to myself. This was no time for sentimentality. If I wanted to protect it, I had to fight. I pulled out my phone immediately and searched for a 24-hour locksmith service. Before the night was over, I would secure this fortress with my own hands once again. For the next few weeks after changing the locks, life was eerily calm, like the silence before a storm. I heard nothing from my parents, and I savored the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. The solid weight of the new keys in my hand was the only reminder that what had happened that night wasn't a dream. Then, one day, my younger sister Tess called. Unlike me, she had always been gentle, someone who constantly gauged our parents' moods. Her voice was choked with sobs over the phone. "Lauren, it's Ryan. We're breaking up." Ryan was Tess's kind, sincere boyfriend. They'd been living together for 2 years. "Why? You two seemed so close." "It's Mom and Dad's fault." Tess told me in fits and starts what had been happening. My parents kept showing up at their apartment without warning several times a week, criticizing Ryan's job and income and pestering them relentlessly about when they would get married. Those days wore him down until finally his patience ran out. He said, "I love you, but I can't be family with your parents. The lease is in his name, so I have to move out. I absolutely won't go back home. Lauren, can I stay with you for a while?" Of course I couldn't refuse. In that suffocating house where the concept of privacy didn't exist, Tess had always been my only ally, my comrade who understood the same struggles. Actually, I'd started to feel the loneliness of living alone in this huge apartment, so her presence became genuine comfort. Living with Tess was a joy. Even when I came home exhausted from work, her welcome home greeted me. On weekends, we watched movies together or tried new recipes. We were blissfully unaware that this happiness was only the prelude to a new nightmare. The incident happened on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after Tess moved in. That day, I'd been tied up with an emergency operation in the ER and didn't get home until after 10 p.m. When I opened the living room door, Tess, dozing on the sofa, looked up at me with an apologetic face. "Lauren, I'm home." Today, Mom and Dad came by." My heart jumped at those words. "Did you let them in?" "No, I didn't let them in." At first. Tess, almost in tears, told me the events of the last few days. "I'm sorry, Lauren. I'd been ignoring their calls so they wouldn't find out I'd moved here. But yesterday they sent a message. 'If you won't tell us where you are, we'll come to your workplace and ask around.' I thought if they did that, I might even lose my job, so I got scared. and I ended up telling them I was at your place. I couldn't blame Tess. That was blackmail. Gentle Tess couldn't have stood up to such a cowardly tactic. Then they suddenly came by today. I said no, I wouldn't let them in. But they said, "There's an important delivery addressed to Emily, so we'll just leave it at the door." So I opened the auto lock at the entrance. Her story went on. The parents who had said they'd only leave the package at the door eventually rang the intercom. "Since we came all this way, we'd at least like to see Tess's face," they said. Tess couldn't refuse and opened the door. They then pushed their way in, saying they were just thirsty and wanted some water and intended to stay until I came home. "Lauren's coming home late tonight, and she'll be tired." Tess begged, and somehow managed to get them to leave after about half an hour. I couldn't blame her. I knew better than anyone how skillfully manipulative our parents could be. All right. That must have been terrible. Thank you for telling me. I sighed deeply and went to the bedroom. When I stepped in, I gasped. At first glance, the room looked perfectly tidy, but it wasn't my way of tidiness. The books on the bedside table were sorted by genre. The clothes in the closet had been rearranged meticulously by color. My mother's self-satisfied organizing had violated my most private space. When I saw the old diary, I thought I'd hidden in the back drawer of my desk, placed prominently on the bookshelf as if on display. All the blood drained from my face. They had, in the moment Tess looked away, trampled even the innermost parts of my heart. But what truly froze me was something else. An unsettling detail. The bottom drawer of my desk. I kept the most important files there. The purchase contract for this apartment, the property registry, all the key documents. The drawer was not fully closed. It was open just a few inches. My stomach dropped as I pulled out the file. The papers inside were clearly rifled through and reordered. Had they looked through not only my diary, but the legal documents proving my ownership of this home? Then it hit me. This wasn't mere tidying. They had another purpose. Rage shook me. I returned to the living room to find Tess looking at me on the verge of tears. "I'm sorry, Lauren." While I was just in the kitchen for a moment, Mom said, "The bedroom curtains are messy. I'll fix them for you." Her trembling voice snapped me back to myself. I almost lost my temper, but the person hurting most in front of me right now was Tess. Her kind heart had been taken advantage of. I sat down beside her and pulled her gently into my arms. "It's not your fault." Never. The ones to blame are the people who prey on your kindness and lie without a second thought. But if I hadn't opened the door, no. I shook my head. Even if you had refused today, they would have found another trick. They've always been like that. At my words, Tess looked up, startled. Memories of our shared, suffocating childhood rushed back into both our minds. Just as my diary had been read without permission, Tess's privacy had been trampled countless times. Remember? When you were in high school, Mom read the letter from your first boyfriend without asking. My words made Tess's eyes cloud with sorrow. Back then, Mom read the letter aloud to the whole family and declared, "You mustn't date someone like that," leaving Tess in tears. That letter had been her first precious secret treasure. To them, we'll always be children who can't make decisions for ourselves. They genuinely believe they own our lives. But Tess, this has to end. We have to end it ourselves. Tess nodded silently. The guilt in her eyes dissolved, replaced by a quiet but certain resolve. At that moment, I knew she had decided to fight alongside me. The real purpose behind our parents' behavior became clear the next day. During my break at work, an unknown number called. "Hello, is this Lauren's residence? This is ABC Realty. Your father contacted us recently about an appraisal of the condominium you own." The agent's polite voice sounded very far away through the receiver. It hit me like a blow to the head. My father, behind my back, had been in contact with a real estate company to check the value of my apartment. Fear rose in me beyond anger, but I couldn't show panic. Surely there's some mistake. I have no plans to sell. This must be a misunderstanding. I said carefully and hung up. What on earth was going on? Was this merely harassment, or were they actually plotting something? I wanted proof because asking them directly would only get me evasion. After thinking it over, I decided to call someone. My Aunt Diane, my father's sister, who had sometimes criticized their overbearing ways. "Aunt Diane, long time no speak. How are you?" I started brightly. "I wanted to ask if you'd heard anything strange from Dad recently. Like, has he shown interest in any property?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Lauren, how did you know? Actually, your father called me a few days ago." My aunt hesitated at first, but sensing my seriousness, she told me timidly. He was saying, "Lauren's apartment is beyond her means. We should sell it without telling her and provide something more sensible near our house. She's naive. Parents should manage her assets for her." I told him that was going too far, but he wouldn't listen. My aunt's words were the final blow. The call from the realtor, the ransacked bedroom files, and my aunt's testimony. All the pieces fit. Their terrifying plan came into sharp relief. This wasn't paranoia. My parents were serious about seizing the fruit of my 10 years of hard work without my consent. After thanking my aunt and ending the call, I stared at my phone. This was no longer something I could handle alone. I searched my call history and found a name. Sam, my partner, who is also a lawyer. My finger over the call button felt leaden. "Sam, help me. I can't handle this on my own anymore," I managed to say. Sam listened quietly to my trembling voice until the end, then said just one thing. "Lauren, you don't have to fight this alone anymore. Before we take legal steps, I'll come with you. Let's talk to them one more time." I can't put into words how much Sam's calm, steady words saved me. His proposal wasn't about another emotional confrontation, but about creating a space to clarify rights and obligations from a legal standpoint. The location chosen was neither my apartment nor my parents' house, but the conference room at his law office. On the day of the meeting, my parents walked into the room where Sam and I were waiting, making no attempt to hide their displeasure. Their attitude said clearly, "How dare our daughter summon us here?" Sam wasted no time on pleasantries. "Thank you for coming. Let me begin by explaining this matter from a legal perspective." He slid a copy of my apartment's title deed across the table. "First, ownership of this property belongs 100% to Ms. Lauren. This is an indisputable legal fact. Therefore, entering this property without the owner's consent may constitute criminal trespass under the law." I saw my father's face redden almost instantly. "Who do you think you are?" Just because you're a lawyer, you dare call us criminals? What's wrong with parents entering their own daughter's home? Dad, Sam is right, I said, forcing myself to keep my voice steady as I looked straight into his eyes. That home is mine, not yours. And contacting a real estate agent for an appraisal without my knowledge is an act that infringes on my ownership rights. What's wrong with checking the value of an asset? We only did it for your sake. It wasn't for my sake. My voice rose despite myself. You just want to manage my assets and control my life. Please, stop. Give me back my life. But neither my tearful plea nor Sam's calm legal explanation reached them. My mother broke down crying, repeating, "How could my daughter treat us like this? How could she repay kindness with cruelty?" My father insisted until the end that it was his right as a parent, dismissing Sam's words as sophistry. The meeting ended in complete collapse. As they stormed out, my father spat words that pierced me like knives. If that's your attitude, then we have our own ways. We'll show you what real family means. I would learn only days later that this was no empty threat. That night, Tess called me in a trembling voice. "Lauren, it's awful. Mom and Dad are here with movers. They're at the apartment." I contacted Sam and rushed home. In front of my building were my parents' familiar car and a moving truck. They had planned to clear out my belongings while I was away and put the apartment up for sale. Thankfully, Tess was inside with the door chain fastened, so they hadn't gotten in. Outside, my father was lying to the locksmith, claiming to be the owner's representative, trying to force the lock open. There was no more time for hesitation. This was what he meant by teaching me what family really is. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 3 numbers. "Police emergency. Is this about a crime or an accident?" "A crime. My parents are attempting to unlawfully break into my home." That call would mark the definitive end of our twisted parent-child relationship. By the time the police arrived, the scene was chaos. My father was still insisting to the locksmith that he was acting as the owner's agent, while my mother banged on the door and screamed my name through tears. Neighbors had gathered, staring at the bizarre spectacle. I explained the situation calmly to the officers, while Sam, as my lawyer, provided legal documentation and context, including the property records. The decisive evidence was footage from the small security camera Sam had advised me to install at the door after their previous intrusion. It clearly showed my father intimidating the locksmith, demanding the door be opened. The look on my parents' faces when the police, having understood the situation, asked them to come in for questioning. I will never forget it. They never once seemed to realize their actions constituted a crime. I watched in a daze as they were placed in the back of the patrol car and taken away. In the end, my parents were arrested on suspicion of attempted trespassing and property damage. Because it was their first offense and the home in question was their daughter's, they were not formally indicted, but they were placed under a restraining order, legally barred from approaching me. The physical threat was removed, at least for the moment. But the scar in my heart was deep and raw. I had called the police on my own parents. That truth weighed on me like a cross I would carry forever. The one who stood by me through it all was Sam. He handled every legal process and he never left my side. At his urging, Tess and I decided to see a professional counselor. In counseling, we finally faced the wounds we'd carried since childhood. A childhood where our value existed only in meeting our parents' expectations. Adolescence without any sense of privacy. And parents whose distorted love would never accept my attempt to become independent. Our counselor affirmed my actions as self-defense, as a just courageous effort to reclaim my life. Setting boundaries, she said, is not an act of rejection. It is a healthy practice necessary to respect the person I am and the person the other is. Those words saved me more than I can say. A few months later, my Aunt Diane told me that my parents had been ordered by the court to start cognitive behavioral therapy. It seemed they, too, were finally beginning to learn, with professional help, that their behavior had been abnormal. The police incident, of course, became known throughout the family. Many relatives strongly condemned my parents' extreme actions, and now almost no one visits their house. Rumors spread even through the neighborhood where they'd lived for years. My mother, once a community figure, now endures the kind of pitying, contemptuous looks that made her days hard. 2 years passed. My life now is filled with a calm and peace I could not have imagined back then. I still keep my distance from my parents. The restraining order expired, but we haven't had direct contact. I hear through Aunt Diane that they continue with treatment. Maybe one day, if they truly change, we can face them in a different way. But not yet. For now, I choose my own peace of mind above all else. Tess lives very near my apartment now, and it became our habit to have dinner at one house or the other on weekends. Sam, who stood by me through the personal and legal battle of my life, now smiles gently beside me. We decided to get married next spring. This apartment is finally, truly our sanctuary. It is more than a place to live. It stands as a symbol of my independence and my renewal.